and thank you, Dr. Piyush, for agreeing to moderate the session. So Dr. Manas has asked me to cover the topic of abdominal tuberculosis. Students who are attending, kindly make a note of my email address. I'll put it in the chat also later. I will tell you what use you can put it to. So when we talk of tuberculosis,
just a minute, sir. Just before you start, could you just pin your screen so that any other person cannot make a presentation simultaneously?
What do I have to do?
Just you pin the screen. Take the cursor on your image. There will be a pin button. Just pin it so that you will be fixed to the screen only.
So I'll have to go out of this then. That red one? Okay, pin your presentation.
Yeah, pin your presentation. Fine. And please, everybody, keep yourself muted. And
now I resume.
Yeah, please.
Hello.
Please, sir, go ahead. Please go ahead.
Is it okay?
Yeah, it's okay. Absolutely.
That's good.
So these exclamation mark, question mark are basically when I present this topic to an audience abroad, because whenever I say that I want to talk to you about abdominal tuberculosis, they kind of express a surprise as to why you want to talk to us about abdominal tuberculosis. So I have to convince them. And once I finish the presentation, then they agree that yes, it is required, because unfortunately, the predictions which were made a couple of decades or maybe a few decades ago that we will be able to wipe off tuberculosis from the face of the earth have not held true. And tuberculosis, which was common in the third world developing and underdeveloped countries, mainly in Africa and South Asia, has actually staged a comeback in the West also, primarily because of global immigration across the countries, across the continents, and to some extent because of the HIV also. And in fact, the WHO at some stage declared it to be almost a pandemic. If you go back into the history, the ancient texts do mention about something which probably was tuberculosis, because it says there is fever, there is malnutrition, and there is cough. So tuberculosis has been known, and even the Egyptian mummies have shown evidence of healed tuberculosis. Agreed that when we talk of tuberculosis in general, the most common is pulmonary tuberculosis, but extrapulmonary tuberculosis is not uncommon. It's about 20% of the entire tubercular burden, may vary from geographical area to geographical area and from people to people. But a significant number of tuberculosis is extrapulmonary, out of which the commonest is lymph nodes, but abdominal tuberculosis constitutes about 1/10 of extrapulmonary tuberculosis. So if we talk of the entire tubercular burden, about 2% would be abdominal tuberculosis, and that is what we are going to discuss now. When we use the term abdominal tuberculosis, by definition, we do not.
Sir, just a minute. Actually, people are not able to see your slides. Could you just
go back to?
Yeah, please go back.
Yes,
and
yes.
Please, rest of the audience, please don't press present.
Yeah, because
now.
It says Ashok Sharma is presenting.
Yeah, somebody else is pressing that present now, and that's creating problem. Please don't press that present now button. So please, either you reshare.
Okay. But I'm not getting the sharing option, because it says Ashok Sharma is presenting.
Manas, first Ashok Sharma has to stop sharing.
Dr. Ashok Sharma, please, could you just stop sharing and keep everybody mic muted?
Some of us can picturize it because now we have.
Okay, you can start sharing your screen, sir.
No, but on my screen I can see thousands of
thousands.
screens.
Could you just unpin it now? Could you just unpin it now?
It's not working. Yeah, now.
Yeah.
Okay, so now it says I am presenting.
Okay.
Now you can see?
Yeah, yes. Please make it full screen. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Please, all of you, please don't press that present now button. Please.
Yeah, so just to recapitulate, I didn't say much except that tuberculosis is staging a comeback globally, and there's a little bit of historical aspect that it is mentioned in various ancient texts, including our own one of the Vedas, and the fact that abdominal tuberculosis constitutes about 2% of the entire burden of global tuberculosis burden. And I was saying that when we use the term abdominal tuberculosis, by definition, we do not include genitourinary tuberculosis, which is actually more common than abdominal tuberculosis. But we are talking of GI mainly. So the pathology of abdominal tuberculosis depends on or can be classified according to the site which is involved, which, as we all know, the commonest site of involvement in abdominal tuberculosis is the GI tract, the luminal GI tract, where the terminal part of ileum, the ileocecal area, and then jejunum and colon are involved in that order. And then we have peritoneal involvement, lymph nodal involvement, which usually occurs with or without GI involvement. So there will be overlap. And involvement of the solid organs like liver, spleen, and pancreas is not very common. Also, the pathology can be classified according to the type. So you could have an ulcerative lesion, which, as one would expect, will present with bleed. You could have a hypertrophic lesion, which will look like a mass, either clinically or on imaging or in the specimen. Or you could have healing by fibrosis of a stricture, which in tuberculosis is transversely placed, so it leads to a stricture. And then the peritoneal tuberculosis can be either what is known as the wet type, which produces ascites, or it could produce adhesions either between the bowel loops or between the bowel loops and the parietes, or it could be a dry type, like we see in the form of a cocoon, a thick fibrous layer which encloses the entire small bowel. So the presentation of abdominal tuberculosis classically is described as chronic or subacute, but it could be acute on chronic. That means there is a long history of symptoms, but the current episode is with an acute abdomen. And rarely the first presentation of abdominal tuberculosis can be as an acute abdomen. There is no previous history to suggest any pathology in the abdomen, and this is the first episode. So the most common presentation in all the three of these modes of presentation is with intestinal obstruction. So it could be subacute intestinal obstruction. It could be an episode of acute intestinal obstruction on a history of subacute obstruction, or it could be the first episode of intestinal obstruction. And the manifestations as the first acute abdomen could be either perforation peritonitis or just acute tubercular peritonitis with no perforation, GI perforation, which is primarily a manifestation of peritoneal or lymph nodal tuberculosis, a caseous lymph node rupturing into the peritoneal cavity and causing acute tubercular peritonitis without a GI perforation. The symptoms of abdominal tuberculosis are basically abdominal, which would depend, as I described earlier, the site, that means which part of the bowel or abdomen is involved, the type of lesion, the gross pathological type, and the mode of presentation, subacute, acute on chronic or acute. So there could be various permutations and combinations of clinical presentation. And then these patients could have symptoms of tubercular involvement of other organs or systems. And because pulmonary is the commonest, it could be lungs, and in women, genital tract. So young women will not infrequently have history of menstrual disorders, which are usually oligo or hypomenorrhea, amenorrhea, and primary or secondary infertility. The general symptoms of tubercular infection, like low-grade evening rise of temperature, night sweats, anorexia, weight loss, lethargy, are less common in abdominal tuberculosis as compared to pulmonary, pleural, meningeal, or pericardial tuberculosis. If at all they are present in the active, more active forms of abdominal tuberculosis. And the active forms of abdominal tuberculosis are primarily peritoneal, lymph nodal, and the ulcerative variety of abdominal tuberculosis. The hypertrophic variety and the stricturing variety usually do not have the general symptoms of tuberculosis. Tuberculosis of the abdomen is actually a disease of complications, because all its presentations are because of the complications. And as I mentioned earlier, the commonest complication or presentation is in the form of intestinal obstruction, which could be subacute, acute on chronic, and acute. A lot of students ask, what is subacute intestinal obstruction? A characteristic history of subacute intestinal obstruction will be the patient says, I have these repeated episodes of severe or moderate to severe colicky abdominal pain, where there is associated nausea, may even be vomiting. The abdomen feels bloated, full, tense, sometimes gross distension is there. For some time, I'm not able to pass stool or even flatus, but then either when I vomit or I pass stool or flatus, and especially when I reduce my oral intake to nothing or to just liquids, this attack subsides in a few hours or over a few days' time, with or without hospitalization and conservative management. And there are frequent such attacks at varying intervals. This is the classical history of subacute intestinal obstruction. On top of that, there could be an episode of acute obstruction which doesn't resolve on its own and requires hospitalization. Now, during those subacute attacks also, if you do a plain X-ray at that time, you will see dilated loops and air fluid levels. So what I do when a patient comes to me in the OPD with such a history, to document that, yes, the patient is talking of subacute obstruction, what I tell them that next time when you have such an episode, go to the nearest clinic or hospital or wherever, just get plain X-ray of the abdomen, erect and supine, and bring it to me. And if I see any dilated loops or air fluid levels, I know that this is subacute intestinal obstruction. And then ulcerated lesion can perforate, especially if it is associated with a distal stricture and cause peritonitis. The ulcerative type of tuberculosis can present with GI bleed, and there could be fistulation, either internal or external, but fistulae in tuberculosis, as we will see later, are not as common as they are in Crohn's disease. And that is one of the differentiating features, that if you see fistulae, you tend to think more about Crohn's disease, but that doesn't mean that fistulae are not seen in tuberculosis. So because of this very varied presentation, abdominal tuberculosis figures in the differential diagnosis of virtually anything and everything in the abdomen. So if you see intestinal obstruction or perforation peritonitis, somewhere in your list, tuberculosis should be there. Agreed that hernia adhesions are more common. Agreed that appendicular, peptic, or typhoid perforations are more common. But if the picture is not fitting with these common diagnoses, you must start thinking of tuberculosis. When you see a right iliac fossa mass, especially if the patient is young, you should start thinking of tuberculosis. When you see a stricture on imaging, you should start thinking of tuberculosis. Patients with unexplained ascites, pyrexia of unknown origin, children with malabsorption, children and young adults with malnutrition, unaccounted or unexplained GI bleed, again, tuberculosis should come to your mind. And in fact, I would go to the extent of saying that any unexplained, undiagnosed, unresolved abdomen in the acute setting, tuberculosis should come to your mind. And these days, when you see post-lapse surgery, sinuses, non-healing sinuses, irritating sinuses, again, tuberculosis has to come to your mind. Also, when you have a diagnosis, a clinical or an imaging diagnosis, even of adenocarcinoma or lymphoma, and if the picture is not fitting in, so for example, you have a very young patient, but the imaging looks like malignancy, think of tuberculosis. Patients who have cirrhosis with ascites, cirrhosis may not be very evident because it is compensated. Then you have a mesothelioma, a low-grade mesothelioma, a large ovarian cyst, a large mesenteric cyst, like this girl was being treated as tubercular ascites, but actually it was a mesenteric cyst. Then you see a cocoon at operation. Or if you make a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, ischemic colitis or ulcerative colitis, but the picture is not fitting in, then you should keep tuberculosis as a differential diagnosis. So I would say that whatever may be your first or second diagnosis, in India at least, or in countries where tuberculosis is still common, keep your third diagnosis as tuberculosis, and most of the times you would be rewarded. So once we suspect that it is tuberculosis, or if we want to rule out tuberculosis, if our working diagnosis is something else, what do? We must have a chest X-ray. Although a normal chest X-ray does not rule out tuberculosis, extrapulmonary tuberculosis. But if you have evidence of tuberculosis, like you see this scar in the pleural cavity, it supports a diagnosis of tuberculosis. Why I'm saying supports and not saying makes the diagnosis, because tuberculosis being so common in our country, it can coexist with any other disease. So you could have a patient who has a chest X-ray evidence of past tuberculosis, but now he or she has a malignancy. So don't jump onto saying that it is tuberculosis, but it supports a diagnosis. And similarly, not all tubercular nodes are heavily calcified like this. This is an example of an extensive calcification of mesenteric and other nodes, but this is not the usual picture. But if you see calcification in one of the nodes, again, you start thinking more of tuberculosis. Barium studies used to be done. All these pictures are from the days when I was a resident, most of them. In fact, one of these probably is in Bailey and Love also. So, but these days, because we have CT and MR enteroclysis, barium studies are hardly ever done. But if you do, you will see these lesions. So you will see a stricture in the terminal ileum. You will see a ileocecal lesion where cecum has been pulled up because there is shortening and the ileum becomes vertical. And you see a lesion in the colon, which may look exactly like a malignant lesion on barium studies. Ultrasound should be used. Agreed that we say that ultrasound is not good for bowel, but if you have a good thickening of the bowel loop, a good sonologist can pick up a bowel mass, and obviously ascites and lymph nodes will be picked up. And then on CT scan, you see this thickening of the bowel, and you will see the other findings. You can see thickened, enhancing peritoneum. You can see ascites, you can see lymph nodes, and obviously you will see any evidence of obstruction proximal to a stricture. In patients with ascites, so presenting with the wet form of peritoneal tuberculosis, if clinically or on ultrasound or on cross-sectional imaging, you see generalized free fluid, then ascitic fluid aspiration under image guidance and examination of ascitic fluid can give you the diagnosis in a reasonably good number of cases. So here you see this thickened, enhancing peritoneum. The density of the ascitic fluid is high because of high protein content, and the protein level is high. Serum to ascites Ag albumin ratio gradient is low. You see cells which are predominantly lymphocytes, and ADA more than 33 international units is a very good marker to say that this is peritoneal tuberculosis. And then you can subject this fluid to various microbiological and genetic evaluations. In fact, peritoneal is the only abdominal tuberculosis type where microbiological documentation of tubercular infection is usually possible. In GI and lymph nodal, that is usually not possible. So you tend to settle with histological diagnosis only. And to get a tissue for histology from the bowel, you do endoscopy, because you can see the entire colorectum, you can see the ileocecal area. A good endoscopist can go into the terminal ileum also And on upper GI endoscopy, although jejunum is not commonly involved, but the endoscopist can go up to jejunum and take a biopsy from a lesion there. Laparoscopy is very useful for evaluation of peritoneal tuberculosis, capsule endoscopy, and then if you see a lesion on laparoscopy, you must take a biopsy. Serological tests are now not recommended to be used, and in fact WHO has said that they should not be used because they have low sensitivity and specificity, with a large number of false positive and false negative cases, especially in countries where BCG vaccination was still a part of routine vaccination. So they are not recommended to be used. Histology is the mainstay because, as I said earlier, in abdominal tuberculosis, except peritoneal tuberculosis, microbiological proof is very difficult because most forms of extrapulmonary and especially the abdominal tuberculosis is what is known as a paucibacillary. That means the bacillary load is low. So therefore, histological diagnosis is acceptable. So whichever method you obtain the tissue, as I discussed earlier, you look for these classical caseating granulomas with Langerhans giant cells, and that is the hallmark. Non-caseating granuloma can be there in Crohn's also, and you need a very expert pathologist to differentiate between Crohn's disease and tuberculosis, even on histology. And then they can make smears and look for acid-fast bacilli. But as I said earlier, the number of acid-fast bacilli is not very high, especially in hypertrophic and stricturing lesion, because they are not the active forms. If you have ulcerative type of lesion or ulcerostricturing or ulcerohypertrophic lesion, or in lymph nodes and maximally in acidic fluid, you can see acid-fast bacilli. One way to find out acid-fast bacilli in the acidic fluid is to centrifuge it. So you drain a large amount of fluid, centrifuge it, and then look for acid-fast bacilli in the concentrate. Recently, we have the genetic test based on polymerase chain reaction, and this has now become the gold standard of diagnosis of wherever either an excretum like sputum can be obtained or tissue can be obtained. And calprotectin is not very useful because it's an indicator of inflammation. So it would be there in tuberculosis, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis also. So it's not very frequently used or recommended for diagnosis of abdominal tuberculosis. Once we have made a diagnosis or we have a strong suspicion of diagnosis, comes the issue that what are the indications of surgery in abdominal tuberculosis. Surgery for diagnosis is today not very common because with the availability of good imaging, expert endoscopy, all the microbiological and genetic markers, if you have some tissue, some fluid, you should be able to either make or exclude a diagnosis of tuberculosis. It's very unlikely that today we will be doing what we used to call an exploratory laparotomy, where we don't know the diagnosis and we say, okay, we will see what it is. But very uncommon. Therapeutic indications could be emergency. So as I said, if it is an acute abdomen with no previous history of subacute abdomen, then obviously you will treat it like an acute abdomen, which means surgical intervention. But if you strongly suspect tuberculosis, and if it is an acute and chronic obstruction especially, then you could give a trial of conservative treatment. So if you think that you are dealing with acute on subacute or acute on chronic tubercular intestinal obstruction, you could put the patient on conservative treatment and see if the patient resolves in 24 to 48 hours. Because majority of patients with acute, even acute obstruction due to tuberculosis would probably resolve on conservative management, allowing you to operate upon the patient at a later date in elective setting. But obviously, if there is no resolution in a reasonable period of time, or if there is worsening, then you will have to go in. And as I said, if it is acute obstruction, obviously, you will probably not think of tuberculosis as the cause. And if it is peritonitis, whether perforated or not, you will have to do surgery because that is the treatment of acute peritonitis. Rare presentation could be a splenic abscess, which if large, single, a good radiologist, interventional radiologist can drain it percutaneously. But if you have a situation like this and the sepsis is not responding again within a reasonable period of time to good broad spectrum parenteral antibiotic administration, you may have to operate upon this patient to do a splenectomy to get the source control. In peritoneal and nodal tuberculosis, the treatment, if you have to operate upon, is largely surgical. So this is a patient who had this large soft tissue shadow, and it initially was being thought of as a retroperitoneal cyst. You can see the displacement of the pelvic ileal system, but this was a large retroperitoneal cold abscess, which could be just aspirated, and then at the end we got the caseous material. So we just took a biopsy from the wall, and then after confirming the diagnosis, treated with antitubercular treatment. It could have probably retrospectively been treated with percutaneous aspiration, confirmation of diagnosis, and may have avoided surgery, but this is from several years ago. In some patients, we do only a simple laparotomy and whatever is required to correct the problem. So for example, when you see this bunch of bowel loops which are confined to one quadrant of the abdomen, they don't move, they don't displace from here even with change in position or manual pressure, and then you find this what is known as a cocoon, extensive peritoneal fibrosis. And it is tedious, but with gradual dissection you can take all these layers off and open all the bowel loops, and this is what ultimately you get, bits and pieces of just fibrous tissue. And even on histology, in many of these cases, you don't find any evidence of tuberculosis, and the pathologist reports extensive fibrosis with chronic inflammatory cells. But this probably is healed tuberculosis. If you have a GI lesion, so GI lesion would be when you have obstruction, or if it is a mass which you can't differentiate from malignancy, then you do a resection, because resection is both diagnostic, it gives you tissue for diagnosis, and therapeutic because the obstruction is relieved. Resections in diagnosed cases or strongly suspected cases of tuberculosis are usually limited. So when we do a small bowel resection, we just take a few centimeter proximal and distal. We don't take extensive mesentery. But if you cannot rule out an adenocarcinoma, then you should resect it as if you are resecting for malignancy, which means wide circumferential margins and mesentery. Similarly, in an ileocecal mass, if you are sure that it is tuberculosis, you can do what is known as a limited ileocecal resection and ileo-ascending anastomosis. But if you are not sure, then do a proper right hemicolectomy, because if you do a limited ileocecal resection and it turns out to be malignancy, it is an appropriate treatment. On the other hand, if you do a proper right hemicolectomy and it turns out to be tuberculosis, not much harm will be done. And it is probably an overkill, but no harm will be done to the patient. So depending on the degree of suspicion, you decide whether you do a limited or a proper oncological resection. And let me tell you that in all these conditions, whether it is GI, whether it is ileocecal or ileal, whether it is peritoneal or nodal, all of us who have reasonable amount of clinical experience have burnt our hands both ways. We thought it is tuberculosis, it turned out to be malignancy, and fortunately we thought it is extensive malignancy and it turns out to be tuberculosis. So both ways it is possible. Another thing, when you have a malignancy and you see a large node which is single and it shows either calcification or caseation, don't think it is metastatic. It could be a coexisting tubercular node. And there are a few examples in various malignancies where if we thought that that node is metastatic, probably it was unresectable or poor prognosis. But we had this hunch that no, it doesn't look metastatic because no other nodes in the other areas are enlarged. This is only node, and then it had caseation. So it was coexisting tubercular node with malignancy, and the stage of malignancy did not change. So you have to keep all these possibilities in mind. Any disease which is common can coexist with other diseases. In acute abdomen, especially when the patient is sick, hemodynamically or sepsis-wise, and is nutritionally compromised, and the abdomen, the peritoneum, and the bowel loops are angry looking, they are inflamed, they are vascular, they are edematous, difficult to handle. Do not do anything except exteriorization. If you try to do any repair of a perforation, if you try to do any resection and anastomosis, it is bound to leak, and then you will be worse off. So do bare minimum, relieve the problem. So drain the peritoneal cavity, release the adhesions, release the obstruction, and then exteriorize, either with or without resection. Feed the patient. If the stoma and mucus fistula are somewhere in the mid small bowel, make sure that in the distal fistula, put a Foley's catheter at that time only and fix it well for refeeding. Whatever influent is coming out of the proximal stoma, refeed. Even if it is not thin enough to be refed, just sieve it and refeed it. Even if you can't do that, just refeed some easily absorbable fluid and nutrients. The remaining small bowel and even the colon will absorb some of these, the fluid as well as some of the nutrients. So make use of the bowel, build up the patient's condition, let the patient go home with this refeeding regimen, and let the patient come back in an elective, good nutrition, no sepsis setting for restoration of the bowel continuity. So if there is any doubt about a suture line, please do not close the perforation or do not do a resection. Do resection, but do not do anastomosis. Now, today, majority of the patients with abdominal tuberculosis, except those with acute abdomen, those with obstructing stricturing lesion, and those with a mass where you are not sure whether it is tuberculosis or malignancy, can be treated with anti-tubercular treatment alone. And patients who require surgery, if diagnosis of tuberculosis is confirmed, in addition to surgery, would require anti-tubercular treatment. And ATT for extrapulmonary tuberculosis, including abdominal tuberculosis, is by and large the same as for pulmonary tuberculosis, which is short course chemotherapy. 2 months of intensive regime with 4 drugs, rifampicin, INH, ethanamide, and ethambutol and pyrazinamide, and then 4 months with 3 drugs. Whether pre-operative ATT should be given before operating on the patient? No. You don't have to give 4 to 6 weeks of ATT and then operate upon the patient. You can operate upon the patient if other conditions are fulfilled. There is no need to give pre-operative ATT and wait for 4 to 6 weeks. There are a few situations where there is a role of steroids. Some patients with peritoneal tuberculosis, because it is an active form of tuberculosis, and especially if there is disseminated tuberculosis, that means involvement of other organs, especially pleura, pericardium, and meninges, may have what is described as tubercular toxemia. So it is same toxemia as you see in bacterial sepsis, but it is because of tuberculosis. So in those cases, there is very soft evidence, uncontrolled evidence that you may give steroids. If again there is extensive miliary tuberculosis and adrenals are involved, and there is picture to suggest Addison's disease, which means hypotension not responding to other measures, there is a place to give steroids, which if the blood pressure picks up immediately or quickly, kind of acts as a therapeutic test also. And as I said, patients with miliary or extensive peritoneal tuberculosis, even with ATT or after surgery, there is some evidence, very soft evidence again, that 4 to 6 weeks of steroids, oral prednisolone, in addition to ATT may, I'm saying may, prevent formation of adhesions in future. So you may give, if there is extensive peritoneal tuberculosis, you may give a few weeks of steroids along with ATT in the first 4 to 6 weeks. Unfortunately, tuberculosis in general and active forms of tuberculosis, which I mentioned, out of which in abdomen it is peritoneal tuberculosis, and the patients who present with acute manifestation, the mortality still remains high. And the reason is these two terms: multi-drug resistance, which means tuberculosis which is resistant to both rifampicin and INH, which are two cornerstone or pillars of anti-tubercular treatment. Excuse me. And what is known as extremely drug-resistant tuberculosis, which is resistant even to second-line ATT. This is more common with pulmonary, but is seen in abdomen also. And various reports show that the mortality of tuberculosis, especially patients who present with acute abdomen, whether it is in South Asia like Pakistan or in West like USA. And the reasons are that in US awareness is not there, and in our countries it is so common and so rampant that the mortality of this disease remains much higher than mortality of most surgical procedures we do, which is around 5%. So we should not ignore tuberculosis. Still, we have patients, young patients, dying of tuberculosis. Just a few words about HIV and tuberculosis. This is a very dangerous lethal combination. So in areas where tuberculosis is common, like us, whenever we see tuberculosis in an unusual form or in an extensive form or in miliary manifestation, or which is not responding within a reasonable period of time, which is usually 2 to 4 to 6 weeks of ATT, you should start thinking whether the patient has HIV. In fact, it may not be a bad idea to screen all patients with tuberculosis for HIV. Vice versa, in places where HIV is common but tuberculosis is not, when they see HIV, I tell them that think of tuberculosis. And two other situations: one, transplant recipients who are on immunosuppression, and today because biologicals are used so frequently for various malignancies and other even non-malignant conditions, these patients also should be on a high index of suspicion for tuberculosis if there is something which suggests the diagnosis. Just a few words about tuberculosis versus Crohn's disease, because the presentations and manifestations are almost similar. In our setup, if there is history of subacute intestinal obstruction, mainly with pain, then it points more towards tuberculosis. But if it is diarrhea with bleeding, it is more towards Crohn's disease. Perianal disease and extraintestinal manifestations like joints, eyes, and skin suggest a diagnosis of inflammatory bowel disease. If you see tubercles, they are more common in tuberculosis. Also keep in mind that carcinomatosis and tuberculosis can look same. Ovarian malignancy is very commonly mistaken for tuberculosis and vice versa. Fistulae are more common in Crohn's. In tuberculosis, strictures are usually short and annular. In Crohn's, they are long and tubular. And then there are some microscopic histological features which help the pathologist to make a diagnosis of either Crohn's, which they see deep penetrating transmural ulcers. And these are the ulcers which are responsible for internal and external fistulae. Whereas in Crohn's, you see the classical caseating granuloma. These pictures have been provided to by a pathology colleague, Dr. Neeraj Kumari. And then there are endoscopic features. These are pictures given to me by Dr. Yacha, my pediatric gastroenterology colleague. So in tuberculosis, you have short, annular, circularly placed strictures, whereas in tuberculosis, you have these longitudinal creeping ulcers, and you have long tubular strictures on imaging or in the specimen. Just a word about strictureplasty, because this is a procedure which can be done in both Crohn's as well as tuberculosis. There are a few conditions which you must, when is strictureplasty? If you have multiple strictures which are distributed over an extensive length of bowel, so that if you try to resect them all in one go, you will have to sacrifice a long length of bowel. That is the ideal situation for strictureplasty, so that you can conserve length of bowel. But if you have multiple strictures in a short segment of bowel, especially in the mid-small bowel, which is not very important from absorption. Absorption, most important is proximal jejunum and terminal ileum. Mid-small bowel can easily be sacrificed. So if you have multiple strictures in the mid-small bowel, I think I personally would do a single resection and anastomosis. But if I have multiple strictures where either I have to do multiple resections or I have to do extensive resection, then I will resort to strictureplasty. But you must make sure that there is no active tubercular disease grossly, which means there is no extensive peritoneal or lymph nodal involvement. There is no ascites, there are no tubercles which are looking angry. And the lumen should be not completely obliterated. These are the cases which are most suitable for strictureplasty. And you can do it in Crohn's also. So how do you do it? So this is a stricture where we did a finger test that the two fingers were touching and there is no active inflammation. There is some hyperemia, but otherwise bowel looks all right, soft, supple, will hold sutures well. So you take two stay sutures at the two corners and then you make a longitudinal incision along the length of the bowel. So the lumen opens up and you can see the annular stricture. And then you approximate this point to this point and rest of the bowel. I personally prefer single layer interrupted. You want to use continuous 2 layers, your choice. So I would like to end by saying that even in India, we need a high index of suspicion to diagnose tuberculosis. Also, if we are thinking of other diagnoses like malignancy, like ischemia, like cirrhosis for ascites, or anything else, somewhere down the list, tuberculosis should be there if everything is not fitting in with our first or second diagnosis.
Sir, please unmute yourself. Please unmute.
I think accidentally I touched something.
Yeah, fine. Okay.
So I was saying that we must have a high index of suspicion even in our country where tuberculosis is so common. Also, when we are thinking of other conditions, other diagnoses like malignancy, like Crohn's, like ischemia, like cirrhosis causing ascites, or any other condition, we must keep tuberculosis as a possible differential diagnosis if everything else is not fitting in with the first or second diagnosis. In abdomen, except for ascites, microbiological diagnosis of tuberculosis is not possible. So histological evidence is acceptable. But radiological evidence alone probably should not be accepted. We should try to get a tissue for diagnosis as far as possible. Most patients with abdominal tuberculosis, especially lymph nodal, ascitic, ulcerative, and some stricturing lesions also may respond to anti-tubercular treatment. But if you are treating a stricture with ATT, keep the patient under close observation. Let the patient understand that it may sometimes precipitate an episode of obstruction because of healing by fibrosis. And then the patient should be willing and ready to come for emergency admission and maybe emergency operation. Indications for surgery for diagnosis are limited these days because in most cases, with judicious use of imaging, endoscopy, and laparoscopy, you can either make or refute a diagnosis of tuberculosis. But some patients, more so those presenting with an acute abdomen, may require surgery. Surgery is always combined with if there is histological proof of tuberculosis. In patients with ascitic type or extensive peritoneal tuberculosis, there is possibly a place to add 4 to 6 weeks of oral prednisolone along with ATT. If you see tuberculosis in an unusual presentation at an unusual site in an extensive severe form in disseminated form, and if it is not responding to the first line of ATT, think of HIV and tuberculosis combined, and remember that tuberculosis still causes a mortality which is higher than most of the surgical procedures that we do today. So this is a chapter which I had written some time ago in this very popular Recent Advances in Surgery series, which was at that time published by Dr. Johnson and Dr. Irving Taylor. It's a little outdated chapter, but students, if you want this chapter soft copy, please send me a mail. I will be happy to send you a soft copy of this chapter. I also would like to, so that's my email ID, vkkapoor.india@gmail.com. I would definitely like to acknowledge my former fellow and now a very able surgical colleague, Dr. Mohammad Ibrarullah at Apollo Hospital in Bhubaneswar, who's done this very beautiful book, Atlas, because very recently he has helped me in write a revision of this chapter in a book which is being brought out by under the editorship of Dr. Samiran Nandi and Dr. Dirk Guma from Academic Medical Center. Oxford are the publisher, and for the Indian edition, Dr. Sanjay Nagral is involved. So we have revised our chapter on abdominal tuberculosis. Obviously, I cannot provide you that chapter, but I'll be able to send you the chapter which was earlier published. Thank you very much once again, Dr. Manas, for asking me to speak on this forum. And I will be happy to have some comments from Dr. Piyush and then questions from the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your brilliant presentation. As ever, crystal clear, lucid, without any frills attached to it. The message is quite clear. If you work in an area which has preponderance of tuberculosis, think of tuberculosis as the possible diagnosis amongst the few initial diagnosis that you have. And
Is Professor Piyush probably?
I also cannot hear.
I think. Yeah, I'm not able to hear. Also.
Could you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Now we can.
Yes. Now we can hear you.
So I don't know where you stopped hearing me.
Just maybe 10-15 seconds.
Okay. All right. So the other thing that I was saying was that something that you've mentioned very clearly again, which is something that people must remember, is the link between tuberculosis and HIV. And one of the most important things, if you look through the literature, if you go back 20 years, 25 years, if you look at publications in Western journals which are published from Western countries, the likelihood of finding a publication on tuberculosis, especially abdominal tuberculosis, is very, very small. Now, if you do the same thing, you will find a fair number of publications. And the reason is the people have become more and more aware and more interested in the link between HIV and tuberculosis. And that's something that we in our own country should not forget. While tuberculosis is a problem, HIV also is a problem, and the two together are extremely important to detect and treat as a single entity, rather than to forget about one and treat the other, because you're unlikely to succeed in treating either of them. A third thing that I would like to sort of emphasize to everybody is that in our country, a lot of people are malnourished. And if a person has tuberculosis and is malnourished, then the outcomes are not good, irrespective of whether they have bowel involvement or not, irrespective of whether they're able to, the GI tract is able to give them the nutrition that they require or not. Their outcomes are poor, and therefore something that one needs to lay particular emphasis on is nutrition in these patients. Whether we can do it enterally, whether we can do it parenterally, is something that we would have to take a decision on a case-to-case basis, but it's something that we cannot ignore. A related issue, something that people who treat pulmonary tuberculosis, especially in rural areas, have come to notice is that people who are malnourished, who are underweight, and are given the standard doses of anti-tubercular therapy tend to develop more side effects and complications. And therefore, if a patient is malnourished then and is an adult, then you must be aware of this, and you must therefore adjust the doses of the anti-tubercular treatment that you offer to the patient. This is as much true for abdominal tuberculosis as it is for pulmonary tuberculosis. So those are my comments. I can keep going on and on, but that's not the purpose. The purpose is to get the audience involved, and we've had a fair number of people asking a lot of questions. I'm going to start by so I'm sorry, this is the first time I have been on this.
No, if Piyush, if you want, I can just read out the chat and keep answering.
So that's one option. The other option is that we can ask the person who's actually put up the question to unmute himself or herself.
Visible.
I think Dr. Manas will do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think Bhavani Shankar, you can make yourself visible and ask directly also. Absolutely.
Just one before Dr. Bhavani Shankar comes. I think that point which Dr. Piyush mentioned, actually tuberculosis is probably one of the few conditions where the dosages are still described as per kg even for adults.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is the reason which Dr. Piyush emphasized, that most of these patients are underweight, and if we say INS 300 milligram, it will be overdose for them. So this is one of the very few conditions where the dose is still prescribed as per kg. Very important point.
Absolutely. And this question is from Dr. Bhavani Shankar, who is, what's the fate of partially obstructing tubercular strictures post anti-tubercular treatment?
There are several reports where people have treated strictures seen on imaging. So when we are saying strictures treated with ATT, obviously they are seen on imaging because we have not operated upon them. And there are various ranges. Some reports say that majority of strictures respond and very few require surgery. And there are some reports which say very few respond and most require surgery. And the problem is that what is seen as a stricture on imaging may actually not be a stricture. Because if you have adhesive type of tuberculosis, peritoneal tuberculosis, that also can be seen as a stricture. So that will respond. On the other hand, if it is a fibrotic stricture, it is less likely to respond. So my policy and my suggestion would be that if you see a stricture on imaging, and if the patient has history of subacute obstruction, you can give a trial of anti-tubercular treatment, but as I said, under close monitoring in the follow-up, after counseling the patient that you may still develop an episode of acute obstruction, which may require hospitalization and conservative treatment and may even require surgery. Second, please make sure that what you are dealing with is tubercular stricture. Because if you try to treat a Crohn's stricture, an ischemic stricture, or a lymphoma stricture, or an adenocarcinoma stricture with ATT, obviously it will not work and it will delay the treatment. And there comes the catch. How do you say that a stricture seen in mid-small bowel, which is not amenable to endoscopy and biopsy, is tubercular? That is very difficult. So my policy is that if the patient has definite obstructing symptoms and I see a stricture on imaging, after explaining all this to the patient, I usually offer surgery to these patients.
Okay, I think that's pretty clear on that issue. I think Dr. Prakhar Pratap has asked if patient presents in, presents jaundice. Oh,
no, presents in acute obstruction.
Acute obstruction suspected of abdominal tuberculosis and kept conservative to watch out for 24 to 48 hours. And was treatment given in this time when waiting for conversion on emergency into elective cases?
Before I answer, I have a request. Please switch off your video.
Yeah, please.
Some of you are not in a presentable form. Please switch off your video.
I think I need to remove people. Please, could you just
please switch off your video.
Switch off your video, Dr. Akhay.
Okay. So coming to the question.
Yeah.
Now, if a patient presents with acute obstruction and we think could be tuberculosis, as I said, we could put on conservative treatment. But the treatment is like any other obstruction. We don't have to give ATT because ATT doesn't work in a few days. ATT takes few weeks to show its effect. So treatment is conservative as for obstruction. If the patient resolves, then patient goes home and comes back for an elective surgery after further investigation. If the patient doesn't involve, we do a laparotomy.
Okay. How long can we wait to do a laparotomy in case of subacute obstruction?
As I said, in any obstruction, 24, 48, maximum 72. How far you go would depend on the overall condition of the patient, the response of clinical response, nasogastric tube, abdominal girth, whether the patient has passed any flutters, the X-rays. So in these patients, I would at least do one X-ray every 24 hours and see what is happening to the bowel gas. Do I see more gas in the colon or rectum or not? So it is dependent on the clinical response and radiological response.
It's absolutely dependent on the investigation, I mean, that you keep following and how he is clinically improving on the scenario. So the next is steroid prescribed in waiting period?
No, I gave clear indications of steroids. As far as we are concerned, abdominal tuberculosis only. The only situation where you may, I'm saying may, underline capital bold, because there is no hard evidence, that along with ATT, you may give 4 to 6 weeks of oral prednisolone, 20 to 25, 30 milligram per day.
Okay. What's the role of diagnostic laparoscopy to confirm the diagnosis? I think
yes.
that you have already
yes.
also.
For peritoneal tuberculosis, especially the ascitic type, if there is no ascites, be very careful. Don't put in a scope, because if the bowel loops are adherent to the parietes, even while putting scope, even if you are using open technique, not very needle, open technique also, you can cause injury. I remember a patient where I was operating for achalasia cardia, and I normally use an open technique for lap chole. I used an open technique and still I entered into a bowel loop because there was extensive peritoneal tuberculosis inside, which was not clinically evident, adhesive type. So ascitic type, yes, but dry type or adhesive type, very, very carefully. But laparoscopy is a very good investigation to take biopsy from the omentum, parietal peritoneum, and take the ascitic fluid.
I think I had just to add on to that, that in the adhesive type, in some scenarios, it so happens, yes, you are into the peritoneal cavity, you might not get into the peritoneal cavity as well. You absolutely think that you are in extra peritoneal space, but that's not the scenario. It's an adhesive type of peritoneal tuberculosis. Everything is matted, and that makes the life of the surgeon a real hell. I mean, that someone has to be very careful on that. There is another question from Siddharth Jain. A patient has completed 6 to 9 months of AKT, has a bowel stricture and perforate. You operate him, resect the stricture, biopsy shows granulomas, sequelae of TB. Now, post-operatively, do you again start AKT? And if yes, for how long?
So, if the patient has received 6 to 9 months of proper, complete AKT regularly, and still you see granulomas, then there is something wrong. Because, so you have to go back to the patient and make sure that he or she has taken the complete course. And if that is so, then you start thinking of what I said, multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And this is a situation where culture and sensitivity would be of use, because if you find a resistant mycobacteria, then you will have to resort to second line. The other situation, that patient has received ATT, there is a stricture and perforation, which is a mechanical process because there is fibrosis, and you send the biopsy and it doesn't show anything. It just shows chronic inflammation and fibrosis. Then comes the question whether to now give ATT. But if the patient has taken full 6 months proper ATT, I probably then would not give ATT. In these cases, whenever you operate upon a patient with tuberculosis, always take a good biopsy of the omentum, parietal peritoneum, and any enlarged nodes, in addition to what you are doing. because those lesions are more likely to show tuberculosis than the bowel lesion. This was a landmark paper which was published by two of our teachers, me and Dr. Piyush, Dr. S.G. Tandon, who was the chief of pathology, and Dr. Atam Prakash, which was published way back in Gut in 1972, and they very beautifully showed that bowel doesn't show tuberculosis, but lymph node shows tuberculosis. So you must always take biopsy from these places.
What medicines of ATT is prescribed in abdominal tuberculosis? That I think you have clarified.
Same as pulmonary.
Same as pulmonary. I think it's a 4-drug regimen for 2 months and 3-drug regimen for another 4 months.
Another 4 months.
Yeah.
I must add, very recently there is a publication from CDC where they have used rifapentin, and they have showed 4 months. I haven't read that paper in myself in total, so that is why I didn't mention about it.
But I have seen quite often people giving 4-drug regimen for 2 months and then 2-drug regimen for 4 months. That should not be the...
If you want to give 2 drugs, then it has to be 7 months.
Yeah,
so
that has to
2-drug continuation phase totally in 9 months. If you want to do it for 6 months, it has to be 3 drugs.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that is very important. Another question from Dr. Swarup. Mace in incisional hernia with past history of peritoneal tuberculosis in a 30-year female, free of investigations. I mean, Dr. Swarup.
So if at the moment there is no evidence to suggest active tuberculosis, which means clinical history of tubercular symptoms, which means ESR is normal, which means there is no ascites, I would say that this is healed peritoneal tuberculosis. So I don't think, but if you are planning a laparoscopic repair and placement of mesh inside, same precautions as Dr. Manas also mentioned, that sometimes it may be virtually impossible to enter the abdomen even with a laparotomy, and you are very likely to cause an injury. So in that case, I would probably place open onlay mesh rather than go in, because to the best of my knowledge, there is no investigation which can show you the adhesions inside the abdomen.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think in this kind of a scenario, open is much better than delving in with a laparoscopy and creating disasters for the patient. The question from Dr. Dara Bhitia, what if the perforation is in a proximal jejunum?
Yes. As I said earlier, proximal jejunum is not a common site of tuberculosis, but it can happen. And we have seen proximal jejunal perforations. So in that case, if the conditions are suitable, which means hemodynamic, nutrition, sepsis-wise, bowel condition, then you should try to either repair the perforation if it is only perforation, or resect. I always, in such situations, try to use omentum to provide another layer of serosal cover. But if the things are bad for a suture repair or anastomosis, I would not hesitate to still do a stoma and mucus fistula. Only problem is this will be a very high output stoma. So all the more that you should have a good tube in the distal mucus fistula for refeeding whatever comes out, because it is much easier to manage a high output fistula, at least the patient is alive, than to manage a suture line leak or an anastomotic leak, which puts even more burden on the patient, because then if you go in, you will do the same thing again.
And what steroids you prefer? If
so for tubercular toxemia and Addisonian crisis, it is hydrocortisone IV. But if you are giving it to prevent adhesions in peritoneal tuberculosis along with ATT, it is oral prednisolone.
What should be the approach for tubercular perforation at or near to IC junction? Dr. Sandeep Mishra's question.
If it is at the IC junction, it may be difficult to repair. So you may have to do a resection. Management of tubercular perforation depends on, one, whether it is perforation alone or with a stricture. So if there is a stricture distal, which is causing significant compromise of the lumen, and there is a perforation, I would probably resect a segment which is including both.
And after resection, you plan a primary anastomosis, or you just go for
that? As I said, if it is a perforation, if it is a perforation, it would depend on the septic condition and the bowel condition.
Absolutely.
But if you have any doubt, don't anastomose.
Don't anastomose.
Stoma and mucus fistula will never kill a patient. Anastomotic leak kills a large number of patients.
Quite true. And it will be, the morbidity will be quite high in
very high
scenario. What about Mace and peritoneal tuberculosis that you have already discussed? Any injectable antitubercular available nowadays?
I am not sure about this. Streptoarbazide used to be available, but I'm
that was
not
pretty
sure.
long ago. I think people
Yeah,
were using.
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. Dr. Piyush, you have any idea?
So streptomycin is available, streptoarbazide is not.
Yes.
Again, in the second line, you have a number of the
Yes.
aminoglycosides which can be used. So those could be used out of the second line therapies. If you think it's absolutely essential to use an antitubercular therapy injectable because the patient cannot be given an oral antitubercular therapy. So that's what we would try and look for. But these instances are rare.
Very
2
rare.
days, 3 days, 4 days of nil orals without
make
it
any
is not going to make much of a difference.
Doesn't make
There is no situation where you need anti-tubercular treatment to give an injectable, because if the patient is in obstruction, you have to operate.
Absolutely.
And as Dr. Piyush said, a few days of ATT is not going to make any difference.
True. And next is, which ATT to give if a patient of abdominal tuberculosis has completed ATT previously for pulmonary tuberculosis?
Same answer I will give. If the previous course was taken complete and still you find evidence of tuberculosis, you should seriously start thinking of resistant tuberculosis, and then you should take help of your microbiology colleague.
What's the role of CT in abdominal tuberculosis?
CT has a very important role because it will show you the peritoneum, the lymph nodes, the GI tract, and especially if you do a CT enteroclysis, it will show you even strictures which are not causing complete obstruction. So CT has a very definite role in evaluation of tuberculosis. And it will show you the other organs, genitourinary tract.
If patient is in IPD post-surgery with injection, streptomycin be initiated?
No, as we discussed, there is no 3-4 days doesn't make any difference. So if you have done anastomosis, you can feed the patient if you have done anastomosis in a good patient. And if the patient was not good, you would have created a stoma, so you can feed the next day.
So how you manage the cocoon?
Cocoon, as I said, is a capsule which encloses bowel loops, either few or the entire small bowel from DJ to IC junction, and sometimes even the colon also. So it is the thick fibrous layer which is densely adherent to the bowel, because it is the serosa actually, thickened serosa. So you have to find out a place where dissection is easiest. Use sharp dissection, no cautery, no harmonic, no energy source, because you can easily get into the bowel. Use a fine, sharp scissors, very gentle dissection. And once you are able to find a plane, then it just opens. And you remove it in bits and pieces. This is one operation which is very easy to describe, because when the resident writes, he says cocoon separated from bowel and sent for pathology, but very difficult and takes time to do.
I think the point well taken is the energy sources have to be avoided. That's one thing that cocoon, while separating and adhesiolizes, one should always avoid these energy sources. There is another question from Dr. Harshavardhana.
What I would like to add, sorry, Manas, I'd just like to add that, you know, once you've been able to get into a plane,
right,
between two bowel loops, then it's a good idea to keep towards the mesentery rather than keep trying to dissect the bowel, between the bowel, and use the mesentery as a plane to move forward. Because separating the mesentery gives you an idea of where the bowel is. Because with the cocoon, sometimes the direction of the bowel loop can be very difficult to decipher. Yeah. And you could very easily get into the bowel loop if you're working on the anti-mesenteric area, or you're looking at the bowel loop rather than in the mesentery itself. So if you start from the mesentery, then that's a good place to ensure that you are less likely to get into difficulties.
And that's a much better way to avoid a bowel injury as well.
Because mesentery, the maximum you will cause is a bleed. Maximum you will cause is a bleed, which is easier to control. But if you get into the bowel, it becomes a mess.
Mesh. There is another question. In a young patient with a 6-month right iliac fossa mass without any features of obstruction, radiological evidence more in favor of tuberculosis, and histological evidence is inconclusive to differentiate between carcinoma and tuberculosis. What should be the next step?
Yeah.
Trial of anti-tuberculosis?
These days, every such case where the lesion is either in the colon or in the ileocecal area or in the terminal ileum, we always request our gastroenterology colleagues to do a total colonoscopy and retrograde terminal ileoscopy and get a tissue diagnosis. One, if it is Crohn's, it will confirm that, and then the patient stays with the medical GE team. If it is unfortunately malignancy, the treatment is different. But if we don't get a tissue diagnosis, then you have to take the entire clinical picture into account. The age of the patient, you are saying obstruction. So obstruction in a right iliac fossa or ileocecal mass is more towards tuberculosis. Bleeding and anemia is more towards malignancy. And then you look at the imaging, the CT findings, then you look at the operative findings, and again, you can't be 100% sure. So if your hunch is more towards tuberculosis, you do a limited resection. But if there is any doubt that it could be malignancy, I would err more on the side of doing a right hemicolectomy. And I have done this mistake once. There was this young boy who had this kind of a clinical picture, and we thought it is tuberculosis. We did a limited resection, and unfortunately, it turned out to be malignancy. So that is a worse situation than that you think it is malignancy, you do a proper right hemicolectomy, and it turns out to be tuberculosis. No harm done.
It doesn't matter.
No harm done.
Absolutely, absolutely. What's the treatment for liver tuberculosis?
Yeah, liver tuberculosis I didn't touch. As I mentioned, solid organ tuberculosis is very uncommon. There are various manifestations. Usually, it is part of disseminated tuberculosis that you see tubercles on the surface, which obviously you won't see on imaging. You will see only if you do a staging laparoscopy. So they are actually peritoneal tubercles, but on the liver. Then you could have tubercular lesions in the liver parenchyma, which you would not see. You could have a large space occupying lesion, solid, which you will see on imaging, which is actually a tuberculoma, or you could have a tubercular abscess in the liver. Now, all these will be diagnosed as something else rather than liver tuberculosis. So it is only a histological or microbiological surprise that you get a diagnosis. The treatment would be of tuberculosis if you can make a diagnosis of tuberculosis. But other than the organs which I discussed, in all other organs, whether it is esophagus, stomach, duodenum, anorectum, liver, pancreas, spleen, tuberculosis is not the working diagnosis. So students, don't make a diagnosis of tuberculosis in these organs in the exam. Even in a patient, don't make that as your first diagnosis. That is a diagnosis of exclusion, which comes as a histological surprise.
Absolutely. There is another one. Can you link COVID with tuberculosis?
I don't know.
Okay. What's the treatment of peritoneal tuberculosis with extensive mesenteric tubercles?
Yeah. So if it is, tubercles are a part of peritoneal disease, actually. So you will see these tubercles if you do laparoscopy or if you have done a laparotomy. But these days, to diagnose ascitic type of peritoneal tuberculosis, you don't need laparotomy. So you should be able to get the diagnosis on ascitic fluid examination, biochemical, cells, PCR, gene expert, microbiology and all, or maximum laparoscopy and biopsy of the omentum or parietal peritoneum. And treatment is with ATT.
And what about CBNAT?
Sorry?
What are the role of CBNAT?
CDNAC is?
CBNAT, you told about the peritoneal tuberculosis we're talking of. That you told about the biopsy of and histological study and
you can subject it to PCR also.
PCR also, yeah.
Tissue also can be subjected to PCR. Only thing is that if you are going to suspect the tissue for PCR or microbiology, please put it immediately in saline.
That's important, right?
Another question is the PCR. So
okay.
Absolutely. So next is what's the preferred surgery for tubercular right iliac fossa mass? Whether you
we already discussed.
Yeah.
If you say tubercular, so which means that you have proven on colonoscopic biopsy that it is tuberculosis, then I would say it is limited, not limited right. Limited right hemicolectomy is not the correct term. Correct term is limited ileocecal resection. So few centimeters proximal, few centimeters distal, where the bowel is soft and supple, and then you do an ileo ascending anastomosis. If you are not comfortable doing the anastomosis to ascending colon, you can do to transverse colon also, but you don't have to take the mesentery as we do in a right hemicolectomy. So right hemicolectomy is for malignancy. What we do for proven tuberculosis is limited ileocecal resection.
And but won't granulomas will remain?
Yes, yes. Tuberculosis is a systemic disease. So that is why every patient, even if you have done resection,
has to follow up with ATT.
Yeah, if it shows histology evidence of tuberculosis, has to have a complete 6 months course of ATT. Every patient.
Views on DOTS versus daily dosing conventional regime.
Yeah, they have been proven to be equally effective. And in fact, the national program probably uses DOTS only.
True.
Wherever it is logistically possible.
Pre-surgical, Dr. Amitabh has asked, pre-surgical intervention ATT not advocated. Why?
Because it works only after 4 to 6 weeks. It takes time. So if you are planning definitive treatment of abdominal tuberculosis with ATT, yes, you start. So as we said, if you have a stricture, if you have peritoneal or lymph nodal tuberculosis which doesn't require surgery, you start ATT and then complete it. But if you have decided to operate, say in right iliac fossa mass, ileocecal mass, or obstructing stricturing lesion, then ATT is not required. You can straight away operate. Only preparation required is what Dr. Piyush said, nutritional. That is more important.
Yeah, and you certainly also can't wait if somebody is presenting.
There's no need to wait.
No need to wait.
In emergency, there is no need to wait.
Absolutely. And Professor Raju Sinde has asked, is there any role of on-table endoscopy to identify other ulcers?
No, because if they are not, see, if we have done colonoscopy, suppose there are some other ulcerative lesions in the small bowel, we know that the treatment of ulcerative lesion of small bowel is not by surgery, it is by ATT, and we are anyway going to give ATT. So it is usually not. A rare situation may be that patient presents with obscure GI bleed, and then you are operating. Then you use the intraoperative enteroscopy by making an incision in the mid small bowel. So you put the scope proximal and distal, but that is to locate the site of bleeding, not for tuberculosis.
In fact, intraoperative enteroscopy can also be done translaparoscopic endoscopy as well. But that's more for actually localized bleeding. Yeah, absolutely. But whether to use drain or no drain, Dr. Malayanayaka has asked, you prefer drain?
In general, it is said that in tuberculosis, you should not put drains, and that is why we don't drain cold abscesses. We just aspirate them because it is likely to lead to a fistula formation. So let us see. Suppose you have acidic peritoneal tuberculosis, and for whatever reason you have operated, you don't have to drain because you just cleans and cleans the peritoneal cavity and then put ATT. Although I may say that in a given case where you have very tense ascites, there is hypoalbuminemia, and you suspect that in the early post-operative period, the patient will refill acidic fluid again, which may endanger your wound. Then what I may do is that through a zigzag track, I may put a very small bore infant feeding tube in the pelvis, just to keep the peritoneal cavity empty till the wound heals, mainly from the point of view of the wound, not from the point of view of treatment of tuberculosis. So that is one situation. Any other procedure like strictureplasty, resection, anastomosis, stoma, mucus fistula, no, drain is not required.
I think
good peritoneal toilet, cleansing, and that's all.
That's all. I mean, in a normal, in fact, in a non-abdominal tuberculosis situation also, we are trying to avoid drains quite often, because quite often the drains, they rarely drain actually, and they rather become more of a comfort zone. Anyway, so next is, what is the suitable time for putting back stoma after the ATT?
Yeah, so we made a stoma not from the point of view of tuberculosis. We made a stoma because of the poor nutritional status of the patient. So once the patient regains nutrition, that means she has gained weight, there is no pedal edema, and serum albumin is above whatever level you want. I usually prefer 3.5. Then you can restore.
Intraoperative, how to differentiate between tubercular and post-laparotomy adhesions with no history of tuberculosis in past?
Very difficult, but you can take a biopsy of the omentum of the parietal peritoneum at a safe place where there is no bowel loop which is adherent and send it to a frozen.
Absolutely. Encountered a patient was operated 8 weeks back for obstruction, probably for TB, had an ileostomy made, came in emergency for obstruction again with no content in stomach coming. What's the best management plan in this case?
So if there is no content in the stoma coming, that means there is a proximal stricture. The patient will still be in obstruction. Rice tube aspirate will be high, and you have to then manage it like any other obstruction.
Okay, so what's the incidence of tuberculosis in appendix?
It's very rare. Again, you don't make a diagnosis or suspect. Long time ago, when I was a resident, along with my colleague in pathology, Dr. Manoj Kumar Singh, we had reported a series of 17 cases. I don't remember over how many years collected, but it's just a histological surprise, I presume.
I think it's more like.
Although we made a very interesting observation that in patients with ileocecal tuberculosis, very frequently the appendix is not seen. So we hypothesize that is it that the process starts in appendix, destroys the appendix, and then it goes to ileocecal area, but I'm not sure.
It's like solid organ tuberculosis. I mean, it's not that very common.
Yeah, it's not common.
Yeah. In case of acute appendicitis with ascites, Dr. Devjit Pal has asked, and the peritoneal seedling, whether we should do emergency appendectomy or interval appendectomy.
Oh, you mean at laparoscopy you see peritoneal nodules and all?
Yeah, nodules, ascites, and you have features of acute appendicitis. Quite often the diagnosis might have been, we have to review our diagnosis in that kind of a scenario.
It could be that it was actually acute peritoneal tuberculosis.
Yes.
But if the appendix is looking inflamed, I would probably do an appendectomy. Of course, taking more than adequate care about the stump. And as I said, if there is a very large amount of tense ascites, I would probably put that in feeding tube again to prevent acidic fluid leaking from the port sites.
Yeah, I think we have Professor Sarosh Khan Sahu sir visible. Do you have any questions or any impression or any suggestions or comments to make, Sarosh sir? Please unmute yourself. Please unmute. Please unmute, sir. Unmute yourself.
I think आप भी unmute कर सकते हो शायद.
नहीं. Professor Prasanna Kumar Reddy sir was.
Yeah, Doctor. I saw Dr. Reddy. Good evening, Dr. Reddy. Nice to see you here.
Sarosh sir, you have to unmute yourself. You can unmute yourself. I think Reddy sir was there for some time. Maybe
there is a icon of microphone which will be red. If you touch it, it will become white. No, I think he's not able to.
Not able to do that. Professor Biswanarayan Mohanty sir is also there.
Good evening,
sir. Good evening. Yes.
Yeah.
You have any comments or anything to?
Yeah. Hello.
Nice to see you.
Nice. Thank you so much. It was an excellent presentation, Professor Kapoor. I think you made a comment regarding the tuberculosis of solid organs with special reference to liver. In fact, I came across a lady, IPS officer. She had a surgery for papillary thyroid carcinoma about 5 years back, and she came with lymph nodes in the neck. So we suspected these lymph nodes could be metastatic lymph nodes, and we did an FNAC, and FNAC was negative. So I think she, without informing me, she went for a PET scan. And PET scan revealed there are multiple FDG avid areas in the liver.
मैं आपको थोड़ी देर में करूंगा.
Dr. Manas, I am audible now.
थोड़ी देर में करूंगा
Yeah,
आपको।
yeah, you are audible. Please wait. Professor Vishwanath sir is on question. Yeah.
Okay.
So that shows multiple avid areas in the liver, and I think the nuclear medicine physician, they suspected that this could be multiple liver metastases or multiple neoplast lesions in the liver.
New lesion.
And she rushed to a cancer center and they did a liver biopsy, and it was a tuberculosis of the liver. And so they treated with and they simultaneously so they did an open biopsy of the neck node, and that also revealed tuberculosis. So finally, she was treated with anti-tubercular drugs, and that got cured. So at times also this imaging also at times particularly PET also creates problem, because where you cannot make a diagnosis of the malignancy here tuberculosis. But anyway, you have covered everything. Actually, this is quite useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vishwa sir. That was an unusual case. In fact, yes, Sarosh sir, you have a question or something comments to make. Yes.
It's a very good presentation, Dr. Manas. Dr. B.K. Kapoor have given a gist is happening in Indian scenario. In addition, I want to give a clinical impression regarding one patient who was a gallbladder case presenting with for an early cholecystectomy. On diagnostic, it was found there is a lot of miliary tuberculosis. Whether the question is whether to do the cholecystectomy in the same sitting or wait.
Yeah, so on laparoscopy, if we see tubercles or ascites, then
without no ascites, but miliary tuberculosis is present.
Yeah,
we have taken by.
If the patient is otherwise, if the patient is otherwise fit, I would, unless there is extensive inflammation in the Callott's triangle or around the gallbladder, I would probably do the cholecystectomy, again taking extra precautions, and then put the patient on ATT.
But in this case, we defer the procedure. We defer the procedure, given an anti-tubercular, and after the relief of the symptom, we did a cholecystectomy later on. Otherwise, you will have a problem.
Maybe the patient was not that symptomatic, but if otherwise the patient is symptomatic, if we find miliary tubercles in the peritoneum, I think there is absolutely no problem going ahead with a laparoscopic cholecystectomy, taking a peritoneal biopsy and putting that patient on ATT on a conventional regimen of 6 months. Absolutely not a problem. Absolutely not a problem.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I find who else? Is anybody else have any questions? Please be visible. I think Professor Kailas Mahapatra sir is there. Kailas sir, could you be visible? You have any comments or questions to make? I think is Professor Raju Sinde. Professor Raju Sinde, sir. Okay, Dr. Dara, you have anything to ask?
Yeah, of course. Because actually, I would just take this opportunity to clarify some point that I have asked in the chat box. That because actually recently I have encountered a case of like a young 18 male who comes for the late peritonitis after the appendectomy in the private clinic. So he just come to me and I do a resection, ileostomy. So now he's 2 months away from the stomy, and he keep resisting me of putting back the stomy. And some of my seniors, they advised me that it is better to do after you finish ATT. And because some have raised up their experience that they before they did during the ATT, and it happened something like restenosis. And so we just want to clarify this point.
Yeah, if the patient is taking oral diet and the stoma is functioning normally, that means there is no obstruction up to the stoma. And then if you are giving distal refeeding through the mucus fistula and patient is passing stool, that means distal bowel also is all right. Maximum what you can do a distal contrast study to make sure that there is no stricture there, because if there is a stricture there and you restore, there will be problem. So if the patient has gained good nutritional status, you can close the stoma or you can restore the continuity. There is no need to wait for completion of the ATT and unnecessarily let the patient live on the stoma. So if the patient is nutritionally okay, you can restore the bowel continuity.
Okay, I appreciate your answer, Prof.
Yeah. So thank you, Dara. Yes, Professor Sinde, you have any comments or questions to make?
Well, it was a very nice session. We have really enjoyed it. That's from my side.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Yes, Prafulla Varal, sir, you have any questions? I think, is anybody having any other questions? Yes, Dr. Ravi Gupta.
Yeah, he says if the patient presents with subacute intestinal obstruction and diagnosed to have an ileocecal structure, but biopsy cannot differentiate between TB and Crohn's. This, as I have discussed, is a very frequent problem. It is not easy to differentiate between the two, and the treatment for the two is totally diametrically opposite. Because Crohn's disease you treat with steroids or immunosuppression, and if it is tuberculosis, it will flare up. So unless you get a definite diagnosis of one of these conditions, then you have to get some tissue for diagnosis. And the only way to get that tissue, if you can't get it endoscopically or laparoscopically, is by surgery. And here, if it is a stricturing lesion at the ileocecal area, I would be little more towards surgery, although my medical colleagues may not agree with me.
Yes, Professor Prasanna Dutta, sir, you have any comments or suggestions or questions? Dutta, sir, you have anything to make?
Hello.
Yes, you're audible. Yes, you're audible.
Crystal clear by Professor Kapoor. Everything is crystal clear. All conclusions are clear. No?
Clarified. Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you.
Nice.
Yes. Professor Prakash Sahu, Prakash, you have anything to ask or make any comments? Does any one of the audience have any other questions? Please be visible and you can ask directly. Dr. Anirban?
Somebody has asked what is the incidence of Kikuchi-Fujimoto disease in abdomen. I don't know. I don't even know this disease. So I'm sorry.
Fujimoto disease.
I don't know about this.
I also don't know. Professor Piusani, sir, you have anything about this? Any idea on this disease? I haven't heard it. Kikuchi-Fujimoto's disease. Anyway.
I've heard of it, but I have no clue of how frequently it is seen, and so sorry, can't answer that question. Heard of it, yes. But, yeah.
Manas sir, hello.
Yes, Prakash, you have anything to ask? Yes.
Very excellent lucid presentation by Kapoor sir. Now, as far as the tuberculosis of solid viscera is concerned, we often come across tuberculosis of spleen, presenting with tubercular abscesses of spleen and even fistula to peritoneum and pleuroperitoneal fistula with tubercular abscess of the spleen. So,
yeah, we also have reported tuberculosis of spleen in some cases, and what we found that basically when you are investigating for fever of unknown origin, pyrexia of unknown origin, and you do imaging, you find these space occupying lesions in the spleen. And as I said, if the patient is not responding to the usual, because the commonest diagnosis will be a pyogenic abscess. If the patient is not responding to that, then you start suspecting it. But diagnosis is usually difficult to prove because you would not like to put in a needle in the spleen to get a tissue. And invariably, these patients are treated as a splenic abscess which is not responding to antibiotics, and then you do a splenectomy and it comes as a histological surprise.
Yes, and that's probably the most common scenario that happens. The following post-splenectomy, you get it as a histological diagnosis. What's your experience about adrenal tuberculosis? You had any?
I don't know.
No.
I have not seen.
You, sir, you have ever encountered an adrenal tuberculosis?
No, we histologically adrenal tuberculosis, incidentally, we've seen once or twice, but we haven't seen a manifestation of a patient with adrenal tuberculosis for which we had to go in and operate for the adrenal tuberculosis or do anything else. But for something else, you remove the adrenal and found a bit of tuberculosis in it, a few granulomas. That's, yes, once or twice, but not very frequently. It's very infrequent.
Ravi Shankar Malviya, sir, you have anything to ask? Yes. or any comments to make? You are not audible. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
I want to ask one basic question.
Please.
Sometimes there are cases with abdominal pain and sonography describes multiple large lymph nodes in mesentery. And it becomes very difficult by regular ways to diagnose as whether they are a COX or there could be, if he's a young man, to a lymphoma or some other lymphatic tumor. How can we proceed for that? Just a basic idea.
Yeah, so we have to get a tissue from there, which could be, depending on the expertise and experience of the radiologist, ultrasound or CT guided FNAC. It could be EUS guided FNAC if the node is close to the root of the mesentery. A good endosonologist can do that. If that doesn't work, then the other option is a laparoscopic biopsy.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
I think laparoscopic biopsy also plays a great role in this kind of a scenario. Yes, Dr. Sadanand Mohanty, sir, you have anything to ask? Or Dr. Narahari Marana, sir, anybody? You have anything to ask? I think for that matter, any other questions from the floor?
There is one question on the chat about Addison's disease due to TB adrenal gland. As I mentioned, some patients with disseminated tuberculosis may have hypotension which is not responding to the usual resuscitative measures. In that case, you just make an empirical diagnosis of Addisonian crisis because of tubercular adrenal involvement and give hydrocortisone, and immediately the blood pressure should respond.
Ankit, you have any other questions to ask? I think your query is sorted out regarding bypass and resection, limited, ileocecal resection. Ankit? Yes, okay, thank you. So I think more or less, probably you have covered everything, all aspects of. Yes, Dr. Dara, you have anything?
Dara wants to say something.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting with multiple questions, because actually abdominal tuberculosis is quite frequent in Cambodia and quite high incidence. And we just simply come up with one simple scenario, because I remember a case that when I was a resident, and there's a patient who just come up and clinically present in the appendicitis sign. And we are working in one restricted area. We have only ultrasonography, and we found that the appendix is enlarged inside. There's also the thickening of the right column and also ileal circle. And more importantly, we also have lymph nodes. So laboratory found that there's also increase in CPR and also increase in the white blood cell. So just to have some of your idea, that would you want something more you have to know, or you can proceed directly to appendectomy with this kind of scenario?
So if it is acute appendicitis, yes, you have to do laparoscopy and then do an appendectomy. But if it is a chronic situation that you are not suspecting acute appendicitis, then you have to investigate the patient, and the sequence of investigation is non-invasive, then semi-invasive, and then invasive. So if there are enlarged nodes, as I said earlier, you try to target them with ultrasound or CT. If there is something in the bowel, you try to do colonoscopy and ileoscopy. If nothing else is seen, then laparoscopy. So that is the sequence.
I think, is there any other questions? Dr. Ravi Shankar, sir, you have any other thing to ask?
No, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think so everything is clarified. Probably there is no more questions from the floor. Thank you very much, Kapoor sir, and thank you very much, Piyush sir, for joining and accepting my request to join for this webinar and sharing your wisdom on abdominal tuberculosis. That's probably a very common thing that most of us encounter in our daily practice. So thank you very much for joining, and thank you everybody for joining this time. We'll all meet next week, same time, with Professor Joel Leroy talking on whether to preserve or sacrifice Denon-Villers fascia. Both of you are also welcome to join this session.
I will.
Interesting session to actually have an interaction with Professor Leroy. That will be something unique ideas will be coming up from the embryology and rectum and the resection of Denonville's fascia, whether to do or not to do. So I welcome everybody next week, same time. We'll be meeting here again. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Piyush sir. Thank you, Kapoor sir.
Thank you, Piyush.
Thank you, Manas. Thank you, sir. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Good night, everybody. Thank
Good
you so
night,
much.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Good night, sir. Good night.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Not